The Chronicles of James, Chapter 1. The Cave of Shadows. James had always been an adventurous soul, often wandering the dense forests near his hometown of Ravenwood. On that day he was out on one of his usual hikes, seeking solace from the mundane routine of his daily life. The sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows through the trees, when he noticed something unusual. A narrow, overgrown path that he had never seen before beckoned him. Curiosity piqued. James decided to follow it. The path led him deeper into the forest, where the trees grew thicker and the air colder. After what felt like hours, he stumbled upon the entrance to a cave, partially hidden by vines and moss. James hesitated for a moment, but his sense of adventure got the better of him. He had heard old legends about hidden treasures and ancient secrets buried in these woods. With a deep breath, he stepped into the cave, his flashlight barely piercing the darkness. As he ventured further inside, the air grew damp, and the walls seemed to close in around him. Suddenly, the ground beneath him gave way, and he tumbled down a steep slope. When he finally came to a stop, he found himself in a vast, dimly lit cavern. The air was thick with an otherworldly energy, and James felt a strange pull, as if the cave itself was alive. He cautiously got to his feet and began to explore his surroundings. The cavern was filled with strange, glowing crystals that cast an eerie light. As he moved deeper into the cave, he noticed a faint, distant noise. It grew louder with each step, until he emerged from the cave into a dense, ancient forest. The trees were unlike any he had seen before, their leaves shimmering with an ethereal glow. James took a moment to take in the surreal beauty of this new world. Suddenly a loud roar echoed through the forest, and he looked up to see a massive dragon soaring above the treetops, its wings casting a shadow over the land. James stood frozen in awe and fear, realizing that he had truly entered a realm of legends and nightmares. Chapter 2. The Village Under Siege. James moved cautiously through the dense forest, his heart pounding in his chest. The sight of the dragon soaring above the treetops had filled him with both awe and terror. He knew he had to stay hidden if he wanted to survive in this strange new world. As he navigated the thick underbrush, he kept his eyes and ears alert for any signs of danger. The forest was alive with unfamiliar sounds, and every rustle of leaves made him jump. After what felt like hours of careful progress, he noticed a thin plume of smoke rising in the distance. Curiosity and concern drove him forward. He quickened his pace, making sure to stay out of sight. As he drew closer, the smoke grew thicker, and he could hear the faint sounds of chaos and destruction. Finally, he reached the edge of the forest and saw a small village nestled in a valley below. To his horror, two massive dragons were attacking the village. Their fiery breath set buildings ablaze, and villagers ran in all directions, trying to escape the carnage. James watched in shock as the dragons swooped down, their powerful wings creating gusts of wind that knocked people off their feet. He knew he had to do something, but he was just one man in an unfamiliar world. As he stood there, torn between fear and the urge to help, he noticed a group of villagers fighting back with whatever weapons they could find. Their bravery inspired him, and he realized that he couldn't just stand by and watch. James took a deep breath and began to make his way down the hill, determined to find a way to help the villagers and perhaps learn more about this mysterious world. Chapter 3. The Witcher of Ravenwood. James hurried down the hill, his mind racing as he tried to think of a way to help the villagers. He remembered the contents of his backpack and hoped that something inside could be of use. As he reached the outskirts of the village, he saw the dragons circling above, preparing for another attack. Desperation fueled his actions as he rummaged through his backpack. His hand closed around a flare gun he had brought for emergencies during his hikes. It wasn't much, but it was better than nothing. He quickly loaded the flare gun and aimed it at the nearest dragon. With a loud bang, the flare shot into the sky, exploding in a brilliant burst of light. The dragon roared in surprise and veered away, momentarily blinded by the sudden brightness. Encouraged by the reaction, James fired another flare at the second dragon, which also retreated with a furious roar. The villagers, seeing the dragon's retreat, rallied and began to fight back with renewed vigor. The dragons, disoriented and startled by the unfamiliar weapon, eventually disappeared into the distance, leaving the village smoldering but intact. As the dust settled, the villagers gathered around James, their expressions a mix of awe and gratitude. They had never seen anything like the flare gun before, and to them it seemed like magic. They began to murmur among themselves, calling him a witcher, a legendary warrior who wielded strange and powerful tools. James tried to explain that he was just an ordinary man from another world, but the villagers wouldn't hear of it. They insisted on treating him as a hero, offering him food, shelter, and their heartfelt thanks. Though he felt out of place, James realized that he had found allies in this strange new world. As night fell, James sat by the fire with the villagers, listening to their stories and learning about the land he had stumbled into. He knew that his journey was just beginning, and that many more challenges awaited him. But for now he was content to rest and gather his strength, ready to face whatever came next. Chapter 4. The Bond of Two Worlds. In the days that followed the dragon attack, James found himself growing closer to the villagers. Among them was a beautiful woman named Elara. She had curly blonde hair that framed her, face like a halo, and a strange, intricate tattoo on her hand that seemed to shimmer in the firelight. Elara was kind and brave, and she had been one of the first to fight back against the dragons. James was drawn to her strength and compassion, and they quickly formed a bond. They spent their days together, exploring the village and the surrounding forest, sharing stories of their respective worlds. As the days turned into weeks, James and Elara's feelings for each other deepened. They would sit by the fire at night, talking for hours, and James found himself falling in love with her. Elara felt the same, and their connection grew stronger with each passing day. However, despite the happiness he found in the village and with Elara, James couldn't shake the feeling that he needed to return to his own world. He knew that he didn't belong in this land of dragons and knights, and he felt a growing sense of responsibility to find a way back. One evening, as they sat together under the stars, James finally voiced his thoughts. "Elara, I need to go back to my world," he said softly, his heart heavy with the words. Elara looked at him, her eyes filled with sadness. "I understand," she replied, her voice trembling, "but I want to go with you. I can't imagine my life without you now." James took her hand, feeling the warmth of her touch. "I wish you could come with me, but our worlds are different. You belong here, and I belong there. It wouldn't be right to take you away from everything you know." Tears welled up in Alara's eyes, but she nodded, understanding the truth in his words. "Promise me you'll find a way to come back," she whispered. "I promise," James said, his voice breaking. "I'll find a way." They held each other tightly, knowing that their time together was coming to an end. The next morning James prepared to leave the village, his heart aching with the thought of leaving Alara behind. But he knew that he had to find a way back to his world, no matter how difficult it might be. As he walked away from the village, he looked back one last time, seeing Alara standing at the edge of the forest, watching him go. He waved, and she waved back, a silent promise passing between them. James turned and continued his journey, determined to find a way back to his world and, one day, return to the woman he loved. Chapter 5. The Return. James wandered through the forest, his thoughts consumed by the promise he had made to Alara. He knew he had to find the cave that had brought him to this world. After days of searching, he finally stumbled upon the familiar entrance, partially hidden by vines and moss. With a deep breath, he stepped inside, the darkness enveloping him once more. He walked carefully, his flashlight guiding the way. The air grew colder, and the walls seemed to close in around him. After what felt like an eternity, he saw a faint light ahead. He quickened his pace, eager to return to his world. As he stepped through the light, he found himself back in the dense forest near Ravenwood. Relief washed over him, but before he could take another step, he heard a voice behind him. "James." He turned, his heart skipping a beat. Standing there, looking just as surprised as he was Alara. "Alara, how did you—" he began, but his words trailed off as the entrance to the cave suddenly disappeared, leaving them both stranded in his world. James rushed to her, pulling her into a tight embrace. "I can't believe you're here," he said, his voice filled with a mix of joy and confusion. "I followed you," Alara explained, her eyes wide with wonder as she took in her new surroundings. "I couldn't let you go alone." James smiled, his heart swelling with happiness. "I'm glad you're here," he said, "but now we need to figure out how to navigate this world together." Chapter 6. The Legacy. James sat on the edge of the bed, his two children snuggled under the covers, their eyes wide with wonder. He had just finished telling them the tale of his adventures in the land, of dragons and knights. "Daddy, it was a great story," his daughter said, her voice filled with awe. "It's sad it's just a fairy tale." James smiled softly, a twinkle in his eye. "Yes, that is sad," he replied, his voice gentle. Just then the door to the room opened, and James's wife walked in. She had the same curly blonde hair and kind eyes that had captivated him all those years ago. "How many times will you tell the same story?" she asked with a playful smile. "It's time for bed." She leaned down to kiss the children good night, and as she did, the strange tattoo on her hand was revealed, shimmering softly in the dim light. The children didn't notice, but James's smile grew a little wider, a secret shared between him and Alara.